Hello and welcome to mobileYouthTV. My name's Graham Brown. Today we're talking about fan spotting strategies for mobile brands, and to do this I'm joined by my colleagues Josh Dallywell and Freddie Benjamin. How are you doing?
Very good, Graham.
Doing well, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, we had a good session last week. We responded to one of our newsletter subscriber questions, but talking about fans and the importance of fans for big brands. And the question that we've had as a follow-up was asked by a number of people this week. Josh, maybe you want to indulge us in what this question is.
Fantastic. Thank you, Graham. Yes, as you just mentioned, we've had quite a few people respond to last week's newsletter, plus also the video, asking, well, what's the next natural step here, Graham? You've told us about the importance of our fans and the fact that we need to have fans, but what's the next step in terms of how do we identify, firstly, who our fans are amongst the people who buy our product and like our product, and secondly, how do we activate that? How do we build a dialogue?
Great question. Let's go through that. So, quick recap of last week. We talked about the importance of fans, how a fan, for example, could be 100 times more profitable for a business than, let's say, just an average customer, and how mobile brands that have been successful, particularly handset brands as well as mobile operators, they've grown their market share by leveraging the fans in the market. So the question is, how do we actually do this? It's all very well knowing that there's fans out there. The next step is, how do we activate? So to answer this question, really we've got to be asking two questions. And these are two very straightforward questions that you can ask in your marketing meetings, and they are as follows. Firstly, do you know who your fans are? Do you have a group of very vocal, identified fans who you know their profiles, you know where they hang out, you know what drives them? Or are you in a situation where you haven't yet discovered your fans? You've got a lot of customers, but the fans are concealed. That's an important differentiator. The second axis of this questioning is about the number of touch points you have. Compared to your competitors, do you have extensive touch points? If you consider like somebody like Apple, do you have a retail store? Do you have an iTunes? Do you have a notebook which touches people on a daily basis? Do you have iPods? Apple has extensive customer touch points. Whereas on the flip side of that, you've got a brand like BlackBerry, RIM, which really only touches you through one thing, and that's through the handset alone. So those are the two axes really of understanding which fan spotting strategy is relevant to you. And we can see this actually laid out in the mobileYouth fan spotting quadrant. Now, the purpose of this quadrant, which you can see in front of you now, is really to demonstrate that not all fan spotting strategies are the same. You can't go out and do what Apple or Nintendo did if, for example, you don't have the touch points that these large companies have. And you can't go out and do what Nintendo or Flip did if, for example, you already know who the fans are in your market. So take a look at this quadrant. This is the basis of what makes mobile brands successful with young people. By identifying the fans, it's the fan spotting strategies. Each quadrant has a relevant strategy: nurture, connect, co-create, revive. We talk about this more in our research. But for the purpose of today, joined here by Freddie Benjamin, who's going to tell us a little bit about these strategies, the difference in them and how they work, and really, relate that to two example case studies that we'll pull out today, to really give you some idea of how you can actually activate and start putting some legs to this strategy. So Freddie, when you look at this quadrant, what are we talking about here? What kind of strategies are involved in the mobileYouth fan spotting quadrant?
So looking at the quadrant now, I'm going to actually talk about Flip case studies here, and then talk about how that could be applied to mobile brands like Sony Ericsson and Nokia. Now, Flip, when it started, it didn't have any fans. It actually didn't have any customers. It was a very new product in the market. It didn't have many customer touch points, say like its competitor camcorder like Sony did. So what it chose to do was to co-create with young customers. Flip gave 100 of its devices to college students to ask them to go and record whatever it is they do during their time and upload those videos. Students did that for 2 months. And from that experience, what Flip found out was that young students did not like the fact that camcorders came with cables. So this fed directly into the product development. So Flip could innovate their product to include the USB port right into the device. So the device would directly connect with their laptops to upload the video. Additionally, Flip also got these fans by co-creating with them. By co-creating with young people, Flip found their fans. These fans could record the videos and upload them on video sharing channels like YouTube and Vimeo, and then share it with their friends. So that was how Flip did its marketing, through word of mouth marketing instead of the traditional advertising way.
I mean, it's a very interesting study, especially if you're a market entrant and you have zero market share, as Flip did at that stage. And, Flip grew successfully from 0 to 18% against Sony with very little advertising. We talked about Nintendo last week, but let's look at the flip side, if you will, of Flip and say, well, what if I'm an established brand like BlackBerry? Maybe I can't really alter the product development so much. It's already set. And I already know who the fans are. We know that it's the teenagers and young college students who are driving BlackBerry usage at the moment and BBM. So what would the flip side of the Flip be on the right-hand side of the quadrant?
With BlackBerry, the difference really was their fans were already out there vocal and they were identifying themselves to BlackBerry. So BlackBerry, all it had to do was facilitate the process of connecting these fans together. What BlackBerry really did was it converted its Facebook page into a platform where BBM fans, that's BlackBerry Messenger fans, could exchange their pins, their BBM identification number, and also create groups and invite others to join their groups. So what this did was it spread the word about how everyone was using BBM, how the different groups were emerging, how there were groups within groups, and there were groups based on locations and interests. And that really drove the word of mouth for BlackBerry.
Okay, so let's put this into context of case studies, Freddie, because two of the companies that we talked about recently are Nokia and Sony Ericsson. And the purpose of this quadrant is really to identify where you fall in that quadrant and therefore what type of strategy is relevant to you. Let's take the example of Sony Ericsson first. Let's ask the questions very simply. First of all, when it comes to fans, is Sony Ericsson have clearly vocalized, identified fans, or does it have a situation where it's got lots of customers but the fans are concealed?
For Sony Ericsson, the fans are definitely concealed. They are not out there proclaiming their love for Sony Ericsson the way BlackBerry fans or Apple fans are doing it.
So they've got to be unearthed. And then let's consider the touch points. Does Sony Ericsson have the extensive touch points of its competitors? Does it have the retail channel? Does it have the online service? Does it have the billing relationship? Or is it really about what's baked into the product already?
With Sony Ericsson, it's really about the second one, what's baked into the product. They've had a legacy as a camera phone and a music phone in the last 10 years. And compared to someone like Nokia or Samsung, they really don't have the retail presence or even the market share to have those numerous customer touch points.
Okay, so that basically puts Sony Ericsson in the bottom left quadrant, right? Which is the co-create quadrant, similar to Flip. It's all about being a small, nimble brand in a larger market and really integrating product development and the marketing process together. I mean, where do they start? Okay, so if you're Sony Ericsson, you say, right, I'm there in the bottom left quadrant. I need to co-create. Surely it's about co-creating what? Where do I start? What is the DNA of my brand in the first place that I can co-create around? So where do we start with Sony Ericsson?
Sony Ericsson has that legacy of being a music phone or a camera phone. And that's a good point for it to really start that co-creation process, to go back to that community who appreciated Sony Ericsson for having that identity as a camera phone or a music phone. So going forward in the next 10 years, where apps are going to be dominant, they could look into creating music apps or photo editing apps and really target communities around musicians or community around photographers.
So let's take the musicians as an example. There's a lot of Android apps out there specifically aimed at musicians, right? You're a musician yourself, Freddie. You use Android. What kind of apps could you use to, make yourself a better musician?
On the Android recently, I have quite a few apps that let me tune the guitar. There's an app that allows me to search for sheet music and then download it so that I have it in front of me and I can just play it off just looking at my mobile phone. Similarly, there are apps for people who mix music as DJs to exchange samples. It really has a very good social aspect to it where you can get somebody else's sample, put your own spin to it, then upload it back in the community.
That's great. So if we'd assume that Sony Ericsson needs to follow a co-create strategy based on it existing in this quadrant, and we also assume that its legacy is music, obviously the Walkman heritage and so on, then it starts to emerge this story about what brands need to be doing, in this space. And if somebody like Sony Ericsson, it's about, they need to stop sponsoring these big festivals and start taking some of that money and putting it into supporting the community, and that community being musicians and artists, and promoting these kind of apps, going out there and giving some leadership to the community and saying, okay, okay, right, these are the musicians that we're going to back and support. Maybe upcoming musicians that people don't know about, or people who are creating these apps for these musicians, bringing these people together. When they have these developer days, they should be getting musicians, they should be getting DJs, they should be getting developers and the marketing team together and putting them in the same room rather than just purely specifically focusing on the functionality of the handset. That is a lot less expensive than throwing a couple of $1 million at a big headline festival. So I think, this is how brands could experiment. And we just, one example, we could go on and talk about all the different handset brands and mobile operators, what they could do in different quadrants. But, how long do we have? I think we've given a good example of what fan spotting is, and also importantly, what the key steps are that you need to follow through to really understand what your brand needs to be doing.
I've got a couple of questions which I know that our readers and listeners will be thinking about. And the first one I just want to get some clarity on is, say I'm a Sony Ericsson, the fact that we made several references to Sony Ericsson here today, and I've got a concealed group of fans. I'm firmly in kind of the left-hand side of the quadrant. Are you clearly telling me that I shouldn't be thinking about kind of aspiring to having a college like Apple does?
You mean like Apple Campus China? Yeah, I think, these strategies are fine-tuned to specific types of companies. And I think that, we all may aspire to being as well respected as Apple, but I think we need to play to our strengths. Sony Ericsson is not Apple. It doesn't have the touch points. It doesn't have that distribution capability that Apple does. And maybe even the resources to create these kind of localized communities like Apple Campus China. So I think, what it's about is it's got to find its feet first in the market. Got to find that group of fans that will relate to it. And the shortest distance between Sony Ericsson and its fans is, through its strength. And that's build on its music heritage and through co-creation. So I think in time, if Sony Ericsson can re-establish itself, then there's options. But I think first things first, crawl before we can walk, before we can run.
Okay. And the second question that I have, is this going to cost me lots of money? When I'm talking to people in marketing departments, we've got big companies laying off people, budgets for marketing and advertising being cut. And the last thing that our readers and listeners want to hear is us telling them that they need to spend more money necessarily than they've got, or more money than they will have next year.
I think the great thing about fan spotting strategies is they are by design integrated into existing marketing strategies. You take, for example, Flip. Flip's marketing strength is already piggybacks into the product development process. So what they're doing is simply, rather than developing a product, they're turning their product development into marketing. So they're getting this free marketing out of something which they're already doing. I think the benefit there is that you can make one thing do two different functions for your company. And you could think about there's product development in every single company. How could they also look through that through the lens of marketing as well? And you take something like BlackBerry, well, how much does it cost to set up a Facebook fan page? And the marketing's already baked into the product with BBM. It's simply a case of creating a basic platform for young people to take advantage of that. And then take somebody like Nintendo as well. Their whole strategy went through existing channels. They used a retail channel to help push this out and establish relationships with people and what they had already existing in the product through the Wii and online and so on. So I think the important thing here is to realize that fan spotting strategies are by design, integrated into other aspects of the business. And secondly, importantly, you're dealing with very vocal customers. These customers have the ability to go out and influence 100 people. So if that person could go out and influence 100 customers, you've got to ask yourself, targeting one customer compared to going out and trying to influence 100 yourself, which is more effective? It will cost money, but it will cost money as part of a bigger spend. And I think it's a fraction of a much larger spend, which is probably much less effective. So I think you look at the smart guys, the way they're going is, they're investing a lot of money in fan spotting and it pays off. Okay, that's all we have time for today. We've been talking about fan spotting and mobile youth. My name's Graham Brown, joined by Josh Dallywell and Freddie Benjamin. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Until next time.
If you want to know which fan spotting quadrant is ideal for your brand or product, send an email at graham.d.brown@mobileyouth.org and we will reply back. You can also subscribe to the Mobile Youth newsletter and start a dialogue with us. Newsletter subscription is free and comes with an ebook with 50 Mobile Youth facts for 2011. Thank you for watching Mobile Youth TV. We will be back next week, and in the meantime, follow us on our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/mobileyouthtour.